Welcome to Last But Not Least. I'm your host, Chris Burnette. Thank you for tuning in to episode 2. I think I'd be crazy not to acknowledge those of you who are watching on YouTube. You probably saw that really cool mashup of video at the beginning of this video. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but I promise to address it as we get deeper into this episode. The way I would like to start today's episode is actually with a question that I want you to ruminate on as we go throughout this episode. And that is, how do you know if someone needs encouragement? I'm not going to give you the answer right now, but I'll give you the hint that the answer to that question is a lot more simple than you think. And it's actually a quote from a man that I've looked up to for quite some time. Without further ado, though, we'll actually dive into what I'm sure most of you Georgia fans who are tuning in to this video and episode of the podcast want to hear about, and that's what happened at the UGA versus Auburn game a few weeks ago. For those of you who don't know, I had the incredible honor of being recognized at the Georgia versus Auburn game in the classic city of Athens, Georgia. It was actually the 10-year and 20-year anniversary of the All-SEC teams from 2002 and 2012. And I just so happened to be a part of that aforementioned 2012 All-SEC team. Those of you who are tuning in probably are curious of what it felt like to even be there, but also what are some of the things that I learned from my time there being honored. And I feel like I came away with 3 main answers. The first is that I need to spend more time in Athens, Georgia. It's the classic city. It's one of the places that people love to death, myself included. And I need to make sure that I make my way back up that way more often and sooner rather than later. It was cool to see so many people that I hadn't seen in so long. And the consensus that I heard was, man, why haven't we seen you around more often? It was encouraging, and it also was a little bit convicting that I need to do a better job of making myself present in a place that had such a profound impact on my life. It was almost like a family reunion, to be quite honest. The people that I got to see that I hadn't seen in, honestly, 10, 11 years was pretty unbelievable. It felt like all things picked up immediately right from where we left off at. And that's pretty special. That means that a bond was built, and honestly, I could do a better job of making myself known and more present. The second thing that I learned is, honestly, the story we tell ourselves and ruminate on is often untrue. I say this because leading up to this moment, I was reducing my expectations every single day. All I wanted was to have the opportunity to be honored at the halftime or at the second TV timeout at one of these games. But you can ask my wife. Pretty much every week that went by that I hadn't heard something from the athletic department, I would just say, well, maybe they're just not doing it this year. And honestly, it was a defense mechanism. I wanted to protect myself, protect my feelings, just in case somehow, some way, they forgot about little old me. And also just having that opportunity of being honored that people cared more about me and the impact I made at the university than I ever could have imagined. And I had been telling myself a lie all these years. The lie was that no one cared, and that I was disrespected, and that I didn't really make that big of an impact while I was at the university. But I was very grateful for that reminder that the story I was telling myself was wildly untrue, and also it was one that was not founded in any form of fact or truth. It was something I was telling myself to protect me from any hurt feelings that I could have in the future. The third thing I learned was that happiness is honestly a function of realistic expectations. I hear this quote all the time on my favorite podcast, Jalen and Jacoby. If you're not listening to that podcast, you're definitely missing out. So after you finish, last but not least, make sure you check it out on ESPN or on any of the podcast apps that I'm sure you all love. But I heard that all the time from David Jacoby, one of the hosts of that podcast. Anytime he would say that, I would always chuckle to myself because it was usually around a team that was terrible and that their expectations should be realistic, that they likely won't go from a lottery team in the NBA to the NBA Finals, but that they should have realistic expectations. So for them, it might be just taking the next step forward. As applicable as I think that sentiment is on NBA standings and on projections for sports seasons, I think it's also an applicable truth for us in our everyday lives. For me, I realized before I got to Athens, I just did not have realistic expectations, at least in those months leading up to getting asked to join the game so I could be honored. My expectations before that were that people would continue to know my name, that they would have just these grandiose and incredible memories of the time that I spent in Athens in those 5 years. The thing that I realized is that I just had unrealistic expectations. It wasn't that people were disrespecting me. It wasn't that people were even forgetting about me. It was that I just had too lofty of expectations around what people might have remembered or what they might expect to share with me about my time in Athens. To be quite honest, I think it has helped to grow in me a sense of just self-awareness to where I recognize that it's not all about me. It's pretty interesting that you have to realize that as an offensive lineman, because literally nobody cares about anything that we did on the field unless it was screw up. And to be quite honest, it's cool that even though I was in the least recognized, least noticeable position on the field, that I still had a bit of an ego. And there was still work on the pride that was within my heart that God and the Holy Spirit had to do on me. The two main things I'm grateful for is that God has placed two incredible persons in my life to help me to deal with my foolish pride and ego. The first of which being the Holy Spirit. He lives within me and basically checks me on a daily basis of those moments when I think my head gets a little bit too big. And then secondly, it's actually my bride, my wife, Ariel. She never hesitates to remind me that that was the past, and that I'm not that important, and that also she's the queen of our household. And it's an honor of mine to be able to live in her presence. I'm totally joking, but I do think that my wife and my family in general have always done an incredible job of keeping me grounded, reminding me of where I come from, and reminding me also that the world and the things that happen in it aren't about me. It's all about how I can serve others. The next question that I think I would love to answer is, how do I think my time being honored at that game impacted the way I viewed my time at the University of Georgia? To be quite honest, I think it put a lot of it in perspective. When I first set out to go to Athens to attend the University of Georgia and be a Bulldog, live out a dream that honestly I had since I was about 10 years old, and those three main things that I set out for before I got there, I realized that I accomplished. The first of which being I wanted to go and be an ambassador for Christ. That was so important to me because literally 6 months before I even attended Georgia in May of 2009, I actually came to saving faith in Jesus Christ. I began to follow him in November of 2008, and it became more real to me, the relationship that I was building with God, than it had ever been in my entire life. The things that I cared about, the things that I wanted to spend my time doing completely changed. And I knew it was only because I had a true and real encounter with the one true living God. And with that in mind, I knew that when I set foot on campus, that my main charge was to be an ambassador for the God that I said that I served. I didn't want to embarrass my family, but more importantly, I didn't want to misrepresent Christ. He is good, he is incredible, and he always has been, and he's been all those things to me. And I wanted other people to just get a taste and a glimpse of what living a life for Jesus and on mission could look like. So that first thing, the first goal that I set for myself was to be an ambassador for Christ. And I don't like to always speak for myself in that respect. I love to ask the people who actually are around me during those 5 years of what they think. And it felt like from my conversations when I was there being honored at the game, that really ruminated, and that there was a reverberation and a scent and aroma of Christ that came off of me in my time at Georgia. And I couldn't be more joyful about that, to be quite honest. To be able to be used by God is the greatest gift and one of the greatest blessings. The second goal that I had in mind is one that my parents actually beat into my head really my entire life. And that was that I was there to get an education. As much as I love sports and I love artwork and drawing and having fun and playing video games and playing jokes with my brother, my parents always reminded me that the most important thing that I could do was to get my education. Because if I were to do that, and in college specifically get my degree, there's nothing anyone could do to take it away from me. So when I also made my way to Athens and set foot in the classroom, I knew that I had to take it seriously. I didn't want to go in there just trying to have C's that get degrees, as my dad would say, but to actually be my best, to show up every single day in class, be present, and do the work that is placed in front of me, and also just gain a thirst for learning. That's something that I have tried to continue to foster in myself as I have finished my education formally. But it's also something that I hope that I can instill in my daughter and any future children that I have moving forward. Needless to say, I do think that I was able to execute and accomplish that goal of getting my education. I did get my degree in 3.5 years in finance from Terry College of Business, and even began working on my MBA while I was there in Athens. So I think mission accomplished. And the third thing or goal that I had in mind when I got to Georgia was to win football games. My time frame in high school, I played with some really, really talented players, but unfortunately, we never won any major big games. Unfortunately, some of that theme continued when I got to Athens, but I do believe that we had some really incredible and special years within that. And not only did I want to win games, I wanted to be a significant contributor. I wanted to show up the best that I could. So if my talent level only allowed me to become a guy who showed up at practice and was a scout team guy and provided great work for our team in order to get better, I was going to be okay with that, as long as that was the best output that I could do with my time in Athens. Fortunately, I was able to be a 3-year starter, and on top of that, like we mentioned, be named to the All-SEC team multiple times. Such an honor and such a blessing. It's one of those things that it still feels kind of surreal when I look back, because that is the most supreme football conference in the entire world, and to be acknowledged by opposing coaches and by the media as someone who is some of the top in the best conference in the entire world, it's a pretty special feeling. So with those three goals in mind, the cool thing that I think I recognize and realize is that as much as the work that I put into it, the actual results were all dependent on someone other than myself, and that's God. The lesson that I believe I learned was that in Athens and on that football team and in that university, all I could do was this: do my best and then rest and then allow God to do the rest. And to be quite honest, that's the reality of every single day of my life. A bonus lesson that I believe I learned at my time being honored at the game was honestly about humility. As I mentioned earlier, I was slightly frustrated with my lack of recognition that I felt like I had earned with my play and my time a part of the UGA football team. The thing I came to realize is that my lack of recognition, or my perspective of lack of recognition, never diminished my accomplishments. It was the view of myself that did. In a sense, it didn't matter if I had some external validation of the things that I showed up to Georgia to do. The key was whether I accomplished the mission that I set for myself before I even set foot on campus. Like I mentioned earlier, I had three main goals in mind. And looking back on it, 10, almost 11 years later, I think that I accomplished all three of those goals with my time in the Classic City. It was also a reminder that recognition really only has the power that you give it. And in this situation, that I gave it. If I felt like I needed the outside external validation from people who, one, either I knew and had good perspective and relationship with, or two, people who thought they knew and had good relationships with me, or three, those who knew nothing about me but just had a veneer perspective of who I am. If I allowed their view of me or their perspective and recognition of me to dictate my own self-worth, that wasn't their problem. That was my problem. It was a great lesson in the power of the mind, that I had the incredible opportunity to choose whether I would give value or worth to someone else's opinion of me. On top of that, to add to my lesson in humility, I think it was really cool for me to be out on the field with the legends that I was on the field with. So to name just a few, I'm sure that y'all are very familiar with these people. From the 2002 All-SEC team, there was Musa Smith and Boss Bailey, literally two legends from the SEC championship winning Georgia Bulldog team. And then from the 2012 class, there was Alec Ogletree, Jarvis Jones, Bakari Rambo, and myself. Needless to say, I was the least recognizable name of all the names listed previously. And it just was a cool experience to be able to be out there on the field and to have those moments with guys that I had literally had a lot of bloodshed, a lot of tears shed, and a lot of just time and hours grinding things out with. It was pretty cool to also see those legends who had laid a foundation that we literally were laying bricks upon. And then to also be in the midst of the next generation, the guys who were on the 2022 football team, and the way that they were taking things to even greater heights than we ever thought of. Thankfully, I believe that God has been trying to teach me humility since the very beginning of my football career. I started playing football at 10 years old, at the time when I moved from Umatilla, Oregon to LaGrange, Georgia, and I just had visions of myself being a running back, big bruiser like Jerome Bettis or Mike Allstott or something like that, just running through guys. But God had a completely different vision for me, and that was one with me with my hand in the dirt. Not only that, but I had my hand in the dirt playing on the offensive line, probably the least recognized and least glorified position on the entire football field. As someone who I think internally was a little bit of a glory hog, it was such a great lesson in humility that I didn't have to be the star in order to be significant. The beauty of it is, in my time as an offensive lineman, I had to put in the work to be excellent every single day. And I had to do it in tandem with 4 other guys. And then on top of that, the work that we put in was solely for the purpose for someone else on our team to shine. Namely, the skill position players as the quarterback, the receivers, the running backs. If that doesn't teach humility, I don't know what will. That being said, it's a pretty special opportunity, and I'm just grateful that God has given me a mind to understand, eyes to see, and ears to hear the lessons and the messages that He tries to teach me through just the everyday experiences of life. He was teaching me how to be more humble, to be more like, honestly, my parents, where every day they put in so much effort and work and time and sweat and tears just for myself and my siblings to be the best that we could be. Such a beautiful lesson, and one that I hope my children can experience as well. So, with all that being said, that's a lot of football talk, it's a lot of humility talk, and that's a lot of talk about myself. But I did want to circle back to that question that I raised at the beginning of the video. I thought of this question because of my experience being honored at the game. It was an incredible experience, not only to be around my loved ones, my wife, my daughter, my brother, my sister, and my in-laws, but also because I got the chance to be encouraged in a significant and special way. So with that being in mind, it raised the question in my mind, what does it look like, or how do you know when someone needs to be encouraged? Some of you who are listening are actually a part of the Chick-fil-A family, so you know where I'm going with this. But it's not just a question I raised on my own. It's actually a famous quote from our founder, Truett, Cathy. And the answer that our founder, Truett, gave to that question of how do you know if someone needs to be encouraged is if they're breathing. So simply enough, all people need a form of encouragement. I hope that you guys don't see or hear this as antithetical to what I just shared a few moments ago about the value that I place on other people's view and recognition of me being my own fault if I don't feel the love that is garnered from that. But I do think that it works in tandem. It's a reminder that all of us really desire to feel valued. We desire to feel known. We desire to feel cared for. And what better way to show someone that you know them, you care about them, and you value them than by encouraging them. So I hope y'all leave this video, this episode of the podcast with a form of encouragement yourself to go out of your way to find cool things to encourage your neighbor with. And by neighbor, I mean anybody that you come in contact with, or the way our founder, Truett, Cathy, would say, anybody that's breathing. So, last but not least, I wanted to wrap up this episode with a cool text message that I received from one of my really good friends from my time in Athens. It's my brother, Jackson Griffith. He actually is a former football player as well, and currently is an orthodontist who will be starting a practice in Metro Atlanta. Can't wait for him to make his way back to this part of Georgia. Yesterday, he texted me this. Bro, your E in your name post was so good for me. People always spell my name Griffith with an I and not Griffith with the E, and now I get to use that lesson with my kids. Thanks, bro. Love hearing you put good words out there. To be honest, those types of messages are one of the main reasons that I do this. As much as I know I don't have the largest platform in the world, I know that if I'm able to just make some form of impact with the lessons I've learned and the stories that I'm able to convey to one person, it's worth my time. So thanks again to my brother Jackson for sending that message, and also for relaying that type of messaging to your children. It's definitely something that I plan to do with my baby Landry, and hopefully with any children that we have in the future. And it's a reminder, the E stands for excellence. So with that being said, that wraps up this week's episode of Last But Not Least. For those of you who are still listening, I just want to say a special thank you to you. If you heard the first episode, I know that about half of y'all didn't make it to this point, but I'm grateful for those of you who did. And also, if you haven't already, please check out my website, ChristopherBurnette.com. Subscribe if you're listening on any of the podcast apps or watching on YouTube. And feel free to follow me on any of my social media channels as well. That being Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find me at Chris Burnette 68 across all platforms. So that's it. And with that being said, I just want to leave y'all with one final parting word, and that is, it's often the things that are last that are most important. Thank you. Have a great week.